Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. In this video I'm killing quite a few birds with one stone or one video. This goes back to my viewers selections, yeah? And we had the top 5 orchids. We will have the next 5 in the near future, and then probably what will be the last 5, because we're then down to a hell of a lot of orchids that only got 1 vote or no votes, so there is no real list there. So there's that, but we also selected categories that we would actually like to have a chat about. So the process today is the category is Cymbidiums. We'll have a chat about how I grow them, how I look after them, times of year that things happen, how they vary. So we'll do that, but we're going to do it as I water them, because I've got to do that anyway, which means I've got to pick them all up and bring them up here. So while I'm doing that, we can do it all at once. We have the glass bowl, but there aren't too many orchids, so there won't be too much clanging. And what there is, tough, as I always say. If there's a big watering session, I will get the plastic tray out, but not for these few. Right, this is one of the Cymbidium coppers that actually came out this cream colour. Actually, let me just turn that round a bit. Somewhere like that. So most of these plants are quite tall, so they will come into shot. But what I'm really after now is, this comes into a type of Cymbidium. There's the giveaway. It's in bloom now. It also has been in bloom some time. So this came into bloom during the winter, yeah? And it's carried on being in bloom into spring, yeah? So that's its time of year that it blooms. This type of Cymbidium that blooms midwinter into spring has a certain type of care requirement. Let's get this one watered. The other thing, we are looking at the plants as well. This relatively small plant has got 2 new growths starting. One here, one here. So both off of the latest bulb that's produced the flower spike, and now it's producing 2 new growths. So this is in active growth. When a Cymbidium's in active growth, it's a guzzler for food. It will take high quantities of food. At the Mathers Foundation, their stock plants, they're like in dustbins, they're massive. They're nearly a metre across the top of the plant, and it's all bulbs, old ones as well as new ones, and they grow them for flowers. So they want as many blooms on as many spikes as possible. So during the growing process, to get their bulbs as big and fat and plump as possible, they actually feed those plants and water them 5 times a day. Yeah? These will take high food levels and high quantities when in growth. Like all orchids, when in growth. Yep. So this feed that's in here, which has just been used to water my Phalaenopsis, is actually MSU at 460 parts per million with some seaweed added. Unknown. That new seaweed that I got, it doesn't seem to have any effect on TDS. Doesn't seem to matter how much I put in, it doesn't make any difference. I wonder if that means there's nothing in it. No, you have to bear in mind these sort of TDS meters, they're cheap and cheerful, and they give you a rough estimate. There are elements, types of salts, that can go into pure water and have no effect on TDS because of the way it measures. Yeah? So that, as I said, it's a bit of a guess. Those things aren't common, you know, they're not in normal fertilizers. Normal fertilizer should register everything as a generalization. Right, so that's that one. Right, so we'll pick the other one up, which is another one of the same. And before I start watering. That one actually went to the show. That was what I call a filler, a space filler. So in a category, in a show, if it's only got one plant in it and that plant's got a fir stuck in it, it looks a bit of a fiddle, you know. Ooh, was that the chairman's plant? But if the category has got 5 or 6 plants and there's a first, second and third, it looks more logical and more sensible. So that's what this was sent for. It wasn't sent to win any prizes, it was sent to the show to fill in some space. Now it happened to get a third, by the way. It's not what I put it in there for. Right, so before we water and carry on with talking, this one has a new growth here which is pushing on. Now that new growth started at a very odd time, but the more sensible new growths at the more logical time are this one here and this one here, in behind this little bulb here. This was another new growth that didn't work properly. It didn't form a large bulb, but it's now producing a really strong new growth next to it. So this one grew a bit funny. But it's doing okay now. It's got 2 healthy new growths at the right time of year that should push on and produce good bulbs. Right, so new growths can start while the plant's in bloom. They can also start growing before the spike even opens its blooms. It'll depend on the plant. But this type of Cymbidium that blooms midwinter on towards spring, the type of care this needs, this is in the UK or similar, yeah, it needs protection from frost and I would say a reasonable temperature for winter time. It's not going to be growing much, it's going to be blooming, so its temperature range doesn't have to be perfect, but I keep they come indoors for the winter. So we're starting winter time, and I keep mine at a minimum of 15. These type of Cymbidiums will go down colder than that. You can take these down below 10, but unless you've got a good reason to do it, they don't need it. They don't need that chill in the winter. That's not what has anything to do with these up here. So you can avoid that and avoid some possible slowing up of growth, bearing in mind you may well have some new growth starting during this winter period. Yeah? Okay, mine are starting in spring. That's a logical time to start new growth. In spring, it's coming into the growing season. Longer days, warmer temperatures. Come May, relatively early in May, second week, if the weather is suitable, these will go outside. And they will go outside this year in a different place. Last year they went outside just here, just outside the grow room window, just along there. And they never saw an ounce of sun. And that's why Cymbidium copper came out cream. Part of the reason. The other reason was that they didn't get proper feed. They got some bonsai food slow release granules, which is a 555, and very weak. And that's all they had for their growing season. And because we had heat waves, they got the hose put on them an awful lot. That's tap water. That's not ideal. Not ideal at all. Ideal would have been rainwater in the heat wave. You know, if you're going to have to put lots of water on something to stop it dehydrating and possibly shriveling up the roots and the leaves, then rainwater would be good. This year they will get RO water with substantial and proper orchid food. They will also go in a position where they get some sunshine. Now I'm going to try and wangle it so that I've got a set of staging that's got wheels on. And I'll make sure they're nice big chunky wheels so that with the weight it still moves easily across this patio with all its cracks and bumps and unevenness. And the idea being that during the morning when we get some sunshine, they will get some morning sunshine. And as the heat starts to build up in that sunshine, I will wheel the whole staging into the shade. They'll still be in very bright light, but they won't get that direct sun. I might even do it again in the evening, or I might find them a place where, because of the way the sun moves round, I can find a place to move it out of the direct sun in the morning as the sun gets too warm for them, into a place where they get that late evening sun without having to move them again, and then they can stay there until the morning. So that's the idea. Now the idea of that extra light and high feed is to push these new growths on very hard. They will also produce roots as they're maturing, and there comes a time in the summer where we don't notice because we call it summer. August, September time, we can have some smashing weather, and we still call that summer. Well, think when Midsummer's Day was. It was back in June. We're now talking August into September. Those days are getting shorter. We don't notice so much because we tend to get quite nice weather. Yeah, days are getting shorter. What happens when days get shorter? Nights get longer. It's a natural process, and therefore the heat that was generated during the day isn't there for as long, and therefore doesn't last for the whole night. So the nights start getting colder, especially towards dawn. That's what these need. They need those cool nights late in the summer into autumn, because that's what generates the spikes inside the pseudobulb. You can't see them yet, they're not on the outside yet, they're inside. So that's their treatment in the UK. Get them some sunshine, feed them well all through those growing months, and then leave them out as long as you can to give them those shorter days and cooler nights to generate the spikes that you will get later. Yeah? Don't leave them out there too long and let those nights start getting really cold. So keep your eye on the weather and the temperatures. And then bring them inside. Now they can come into that time of year into an unheated greenhouse, they'll be okay. But you should start seeing spikes sort of into October, possibly November, yeah? And then they'll grow on and come into bloom midwinter to late winter. So that's one type. And those two are the same plant, effectively. There's a little story there. If you're new, I keep forgetting I get new subscribers that don't hear my stories. This plant was bought at the Mathers Foundation from Dave Mathers, the actual owner, well, founder member, whatever you want to call it, him and his wife Jill. And the actual foundation plants are not normally for sale, although they do have a few surplus ones during the visits when they're open and at shows. They do go to some. But this was for sale in his private collection the first time I went. Cymbidium copper. The blooms were gorgeous. A real vibrant coppery, autumny, bronzy, brassy colour. They were gorgeous. And he'd already said that these plants over here are not for sale. These few are, and those at the far end which belong to another company, but they are for sale. And so I said, so this is one of yours, is it? He said, yeah, this is some plants out of my private collection. They're nothing to do with the foundation, and I brought some in to sell, you know. I'm thinking we're going to hear extortionate prices here. I said, well, how much is this one then? Because these blooms are gorgeous. He said, £20. So I paid £20 for a really nice Cymbidium out of Mr. Mather's private collection, and I was well chuffed. And it had one spike just starting and the one that had just opened in bloom. Yeah. When the second spike opened, it was this colour, and it wasn't copper. So I actually sent some pictures in to Jim Durrant, the guy who looks after the plants in the main, and said, what's going on here? And he said, well, inadvertently it looks like you've got two different types of Cymbidiums in the same pot there. He said it does happen. When you're doing a massive repotting session and you're splitting plants up, you can get a bit of one and a bit another one in the same pot. So I just accepted that I had two. And when I repotted it, I did have two plants. And then this year, after not getting any bright light and not getting proper feed, both plants opened their blooms and they were both the cream colour. I had no copper. And chatting to Cymbidium growers that have been doing it a lot longer than me, basically it's light and feed that can affect colours on some Cymbidium hybrids. Not normally species, but some hybrids are sensitive to not getting that extra light. So these two will get it this year, and we'll see what colour the blooms are next time round. So watch this space in 9 months' time and see what we get. So that's those two. Now I have to water my Cymbidiums in a certain order because there's two that have to go last and in a certain order for reasons we'll get to. Right, so this is a bit sad, but this is what happens. You have a plant that you absolutely love the blooms on, and they eventually die. And my little Showgirl has had it. The bloom spike's gone. Now it's still got one bloom that's hanging in there, and I could sort of say, well, for everything in bloom on the 8th, we'll leave this one and see if it will hang in there. But it's not worth it. Quite honestly, the sooner this spike comes off, the sooner the plant will trigger that it's lost its blooms and it's time to produce a new growth. So that's what it'll do. This was another one that went into in as a space saver, and that got second. Unexpectedly. Quite honestly, looking at the one that got first, I still believe this should have got the first, and quite a lot of people have agreed with me. But as they always say, judge's decision is final. And without taking them outside and having a chat, there's not much you can do about it. Anyway, so this one, this started off with a dormant bulb, effectively an old one, and when I bought it, it had these two. We grew this new bulb last year, bigger than anything else, which then produced that spike. So this should come back into growth now, spike removed. This one, again, because it's in bloom this time of year, this comes into the same category. Feed and water well from now until the first sign of the next spike. We might want to think about changing at that point, and I now, this year, for the first time, have the ability to accommodate that change in feed. And what is that change in feed? I'll go and get it. As we're doing a big thing, I'll go and get it. My MSU feed is a standard formula that I believe is a nice balanced feed for all types of orchids, for all types of growth, and that's what I've been using for a very long time. However, it has become apparent that if you change your feed at the onset, either just before or at the onset of buds and spikes, to a low nitrogen feed and a high, what's the one this is high in? Oh, I can't flipping read that. It should have the NPK. That's what we're looking at here. Yeah, we're looking at 3, 12, 6, and the 12 would be potassium, I think, is the one in the middle, isn't it? Oh, I keep forgetting. I can't read that, it's too small. Far too small. It's trouble with small containers, but this is quite a strong mix effectively when it goes into water. Now this is called bloom. Yeah, it's supposed to, well, if you read about these types of things, it's supposed to make your plants bloom. No, it don't. What it does is aid and abet the growth of buds and spikes at the expense of green growth, foliage type growth, because the nitrogen's gone right down. Yeah, so the energy that you're putting into the plants is customed towards buds and spikes. This is the first time I've had this, and that's what it will get used for, is things that are just either about to predictably or have started buds and spikes, and I will switch to that feed. These will get that treatment. So the idea is that this actually produces more compact spikes with bigger and brighter colours on the blooms. That remains to be seen. Don't believe everything written on a product. Right, so where have we got to then? We've got to this pretty little one. And this again will come into this category. It's in bloom now. And yeah, this produced quite a few spikes. I think all the spikes are open now. Yeah. Have we got new growths yet? Yes. We have some new growths. I'm not going to try and find them all because there's actually quite a lot and they're all over the plant. But yes, we have new growths. Yeah? There's another one there on the end of my finger. But there's 5 or 6 new growths on this plant. Now these pseudobulbs on this plant are not swollen and plump. They're a bit shriveled. Now I don't know whether that was a result of repotting. That's all right, I'm one that I can't stand brown tips on leaves or any leaves that are looking wrong. I always sort of think if they're gone, then they can't affect any other leaves on the plant. But some of the spikes on here weren't very good, like this one's only got 3 blooms on down here. Whereas these 2 spikes are a bit better. The one round this side was, I think this was the first one to open round here. But yes, we've got new growths coming. It's in bloom now, so it comes into the same category as the 3 we've already looked at. This is Cymbidium tiger tail. So that will get exactly the same treatment. All of these were repotted at the beginning of last year. They've got no moss in them. They are basically bark and perlite in some shape or form, so they don't need repotting this year. So they can stay nice and stable, expand their root system without any disturbance whatsoever. And because of the media they're in, it's not as good as inorganic, which I don't use, but if they were inorganic, then the only reason to repot them would be that they've outgrown the pot. And because of the size of the pots these are put in, which is quite compact, that's the reason these will get repotted next time, because the bark will last 3 or 4 years. It's reasonable quality bark. They're allowed to dry off in the winter time in between, so it's not staying soaking wet all the time. But we will not be letting them dry off to any extent when we get to summer growing time. We want them at least moist all the time. Keep them going. Right. Get some out of the way then. So that's this one. That was Cymbidium tiger tail, if I didn't say. Lovely blooms on that. Oh, we didn't have a closer look at the blooms, did we? Let's have a look at the blooms. They are very attractive. So I can find one that I can point directly at the camera. Oops, dripping all over the place now. Very attractive blooms. It's the combination of the shades of greeny. It's not pure green, it's like greeny bronze, I'd say, but and then the really delicate pink in the lip. Virtually no markings, and I think it just works. I think it's just an attractive pairing of colours. Works well. That lives up there not because it needs the brightest light at this time of year. It's up there because of its size. And then my little Showgirl can go back where it came from again. It's just because it fits on their shelf basically. So that's that. Now where are we? We've got those 2 to do next. The 2 that are on the low shelf. So that plant has to come out of the way because it's on the floor. As does that one. I always thought that when I started using these bottom shelves, we're going to start doing bending again, which I didn't ought to be doing to any great extent. But nonetheless, these can't go anywhere else because of their size. They're the only shelves that can accommodate them. Oh. Right, what have we got here then? This is a Cymbidium hybrid, as are most of the rest of them. And what I've done with my labels is put the colour on. Yeah? So that's not its name, it's just the colour, and that's why I put it in brackets, so that I can remember which one's which. Now again, this one is in growth. So what we've got here is, where can we start? We'll start on the end, just behind the label. So we've got a new growth there, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's the one we started with. 6 nice strong new growths on this one. Those new growths, when they fill out and become the size of at least the ones that are already in there, hopefully a little bit bigger, this pot will be full. So next year, at this point in time, when the new growths are starting, this one will have to be repotted, because it will have filled its pot. Now you can leave them in there when they fill their pot and let them spill over the sides, but you often waste roots if you do that, because the bulbs seem to sense, because most Cymbidiums are terrestrials to a degree. They're often found on the ground in leaf litter and stuff, but as a consequence, if the bulb senses there's nothing underneath it, it just seems to decide not to grow roots. Anyway, so this comes into the same category. It's coming into growth at this time of year. If I remember rightly, this one blooms early. So this one blooms early winter or autumn, whatever you want to call it. So this one's a little bit earlier, but I would still put it in the same category as needing those outside light and those changes in day length and temperature to generate spikes. Now, all being well, this with 6 new growths should produce 6 spikes, because each one of those new growths is independent. It's not draining resources from any of the others. They're all getting their resources from the bulb that they're growing out of, and they're all growing out of a different one. So they're not sharing resources as such. So they should all grow on to nice strong bulbs, and hopefully all bloom. And if they do, that'll be quite a showstopper. So that's that one. I will have already done it by now, but those that haven't got blooms on, I will put pictures of the blooms, so you will see the colours of the blooms for that one. The other one that lives on the lower story down here. Oof. Now this is the first one that's different, and it might be the only one, come to think of it. I'm not sure, there might be one other one, I'm not sure. Why is this one different? This one is different because these are the new growths. Here, and there's 2. Where's the other one gone? I'm being dim now. Oh, it's right in the middle of the plant. It's literally the centre of the plant. So what's different about these new growths then? They're almost mature. And if you look at the one in the centre of the plant, through that gap, it's starting to form its bulb. These 2 are maturing now. End of winter going into spring. Early summer before these start maturing. What do you think is going to happen next on that plant? Once those bulbs are mature, it's highly likely to come into bloom. So the spikes may well start growing on this one in late spring, and it will bloom in summer. That's a completely different type of plant. And at the moment I haven't got anything to say why this will come into bloom compared with my logic for the others. The logic for those, forming those embryo spikes as the day lengths drop down and the temperatures drop down at night comes direct from Jim Durrant at Mather's Foundation, ex-McBean's. Been hybridising and growing Cymbidiums all of his working life practically. Knows what he's doing. Yeah? But I haven't got the logic why this type produces its spikes? In other words, is there anything special to do with it? And if there is, I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to treat this like any other orchid. So the fact that these bulbs are maturing, as far as I'm concerned, it's still in active growth, so it's getting a high feed level. And the instant I see a spike, because anything else that grows on this plant is probably going to be a spike. You can all do this. Is it a spike? Is it a growth? I can't tell. Oh, what's the difference? Oh, get on the internet. Just leave it 2 or 3 weeks and you'll see what it is. Don't be so impatient. But basically, spikes, when they've got to about that big or bigger, if you gently squeeze the top of it, they'll be hollow. Whereas a growth is a solid structure. There are no hollow bits. That's the main difference. Yes, so this has got maturing growths and hopefully is going to come into bloom once those growths are mature. Now that could go inside with going outside. And therefore it might be the change of the atmosphere going into fresh air, cooler nights, back to cooler nights, because this only goes down to 15. There are no cool nights in here. That's as cold as it gets, and that's because of everything else in here, not because of these. But the change might generate the spikes on this one. As soon as I see the spikes on this one, we will change the feed. Yeah, so this type is different to the others we've seen because of when it starts its new growths and when they mature, and logically when it comes into bloom as a consequence. And I've just realised I haven't got a coffee in here. What I do for you people. Like an orchid with no food, it don't work properly. Right. So that's that one. I'll just let that drain a bit because I need my space back now because I've got some others to come up here. So these that I've just got off of that low shelf can now go back on the low shelf out the way. I can't put the ones back on the black tables yet because there's still one on there to do. And it goes at the back. So I don't want to put the ones in front of it back until I've done it. That's what I said, there is a sequence going on here. So, it goes down there. These get very good light on that bottom shelf. Don't get me wrong, because it's a bottom shelf. They're right up against 2 sides of the grow room in the corner. They've got strong light coming in from both sides, so they get good light. They'll get much better light when they go outside, and more even possibly. Although you put a plant outside, you can introduce it to directional light. So what do you do to compensate that? Turn them round. Just literally every week do a quarter of a turn or something so that it faces, because you're going to have, in this country, the sun occupies 2/3 of the sky in the summer, which means 1/3 of the sky has never got any sun coming out of it. So it's always away from the light, and the plant will grow to the centre point of that 2/3, so it'll grow towards midday type light. Yeah, well, turn it round a quarter of a turn every so often, about every week, something like that, and it will adjust itself to that light. I've got a plant gone missing. Where did I put it? Oh, there it is. Oh. This one lives here because it's just too tall to go anywhere else. If it goes anywhere else, the blooms are in the roof. So by putting it there, I can still see the blooms, although they are nearly finished now. Right, which takes us on to this one, which is incredibly difficult to handle because it's big and it's heavy, and some numpty, well actually it was because of the sheer size of the root system, some numpty potted it too high in the pot, and the bark comes up to the rim of the pot, so when I water it, it washes half the bark off and I have to put it back on. Yeah, that's my fault. It should have gone in a bit deeper, but it had such a big root system. To get it in any deeper in the pot, I would have had to take some roots off. Now, what's wrong with the pot it's in? Compare. Let's compare pots. Can you see that now? I'll have to drop the camera down. Something like that. Yeah, I think that's about right. This is a Cymbidium pot. You can tell it says Cymbidium on it. These are not that easy to get hold of, but they are quite narrow and deep, and that's what Cymbidiums like. They like to feel quite tight in the pot, but they need a root run. They like to put their roots down deep. Yeah? So these shaped pots are brilliant. This is not one of those. This was the only pot I had that was big enough to accommodate this plant, and it's, believe it or not, only as deep as this one. And this one's for a plant half the size. Yeah? So this one is not in an ideal pot. I will do some work, but it's not due a repot now for a while. I will do some work and see if I can find some more Cymbidium pots of the larger size. They must be around. Anyway, this one has a new growth here, a new growth here. As the camera's pointing down, we'll just do it on the table. This is so heavy, I've got a job to water it. There's one coming up the middle of the plant, so that's 3. 1, 2, 3. I think that's all. Oh no, there's a big one round here that's actually quite tall. This one, so that's 4. So we've got 1, 2. I missed that one. 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 new growths on this one, which in theory should be 5 flower spikes. Now these are going to all be growths at this time of year. It's be very unusual for a Cymbidium that's bloomed to be coming back into growth and then produce some spikes as well. That would be highly unusual. Not unknown, but highly unusual. So this one's coming back into growth. Some of these new growths are pushing on quite well, like this one here, but nonetheless this plant is in active growth. It's at it. Consequently, high level of feed. Now, let me just turn that camera up. I'll show you what I mean about when you... Where's me watering bowl? Can't see what I'm doing. Oh, I can't see the watering bowl because I've flipping plants in the way. Duh. Somewhere like that, because I just want you to see the hassle I have watering this plant and the consequences of planting them too high in bark. Now this one's got some grow stones in it, but you can see the top of the plant is, all the roots are bare near the top of the plant. So what are we going to do with this then? I'm going to have to hold this, and it's heavy, and it's just about to get heavier as I pour water on it. And as I pour water on it, a lot of the bark's going to come off. So I have to do it really gently, give it time to soak in, and I will still get a load of bark coming off. Now it's getting too heavy to hold with my fingertips, which is all I can do. This is incredibly difficult. The easy way to do it is to rest it on there. Oh, here comes trouble. Who rattled your cage, cat? Eh? You've got food. And if you want to go out, you come out here and ask, don't you? Yes, you. Oh, this is hard work, this one. Luckily I don't have to do it that often. Well, and once it's outside it'll be a lot easier because I'll be using the watering can. I'll be mixing up the feed at watering can level rather than messing about with a glass and a bowl like this one. Right, so that's the awkward one. Again, this comes into the same sort of category. Although this one blooms a little bit earlier than the ones that were in bloom that I showed you, this one comes into bloom late autumn into winter. So it's the spikes are going to form a little bit earlier on this one. Nonetheless, it still comes into the same sort of category. Ooh. Let me put that back there. So it's, again, good light to get those new growths going. And then these two can go back now because we've only got one left. And that one's a special as far as watering is concerned anyway. So nearly there now. Right, and the last one. This one is always last, no matter what, because it is possible it's virus. And my friend seems to think it's just stressed. And I've got, apart from getting a test kit, which I'm not prepared to do, because the test kit would be more expensive than the plant is worth. So unless you've got a very expensive plant, they're not, you know, I don't know whether they're cheaper in the States, but they're certainly not here. Right, so this one potentially has a virus. If you look at the older leaves, yeah? Let me just flick this up a bit again. If you look at the oldest leaves on the plant, they're not that badly marked. Yeah? So these are the older leaves. The leaves that were produced after the repot, and as my friend thinks, as a consequence of the stress, repotting, going outside, having lived in my previous conservatory with all that heat and everything, total change of environment, he thinks this one just got stressed. And when it starts to grow again, it might be okay. And it's worth a chance because these are nice blooms. In addition to that, effectively this is Hannah's plant. I look after it for her. The friend of hers who kept orchids died, and at the funeral she was presented with one of his orchids. That's to sort of remember him by. So it's a bit special to her, but she understands if it does turn out to be virused, it'll have to go. But at the moment it's kept separate. This bowl and everything to do with watering will be sterilised after I've watered this plant. Yeah? So what comes out of this pot doesn't go near any other orchid, and it has to be maintained like that. Hopefully when this bloom finishes, which is soon, let me show you this as I've got an example of it. When you've got it's usually with reds. So if you look at this bloom here, look at the colour of the lip, yeah, and the markings. As the plant goes over, it bleeds. All the red runs out into the pale colours, and that means the bloom's going over basically. So again, this one's in flower at this time of year. This comes into that similar category. It's a winter bloomer effectively. And all I've got to do with this is wait and see what happens next. And if what happens next is a nice new growth that is clean, without all the spottiness on the leaves, then we can sort of say, well, yes, it was stressed. And will I still keep it separate? Yes, I will, just in case. It's not a big deal to keep this one separate. See, when they're outside, it's naturally separate because I'll be watering with the watering can. All I've got to do is make sure it doesn't touch any of the others, and the water that runs out of the bottom doesn't get anywhere near the others as well. So it'll have to go on a bottom shelf on an edge so that it doesn't touch anything else. And we will see what happens. But as I've got an example, so we had a look at some clean leaves. These are the leaves, this is one of the worst ones. So this is what we're talking about. Let me just bring the camera down and swing it round, and then this is what we're talking about. See, now I've got to go careful now not to touch any orchids with my hands. Yeah? That's extreme caution. Effectively, viruses tend to spread through wounds, through damaged tissue, often on cutting tools. So you trim some roots on one plant that's got a virus, and then without sterilising your scissors, you trim some leaves on the next one that you pick up. You will transfer the virus on your tools into a wound. That's how it normally gets in. So it can spread from pot to pot via water, but that's rare. Yeah. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. And that does seriously look like either the mosaic virus or the Cymbidium tobacco virus. They are similar, yeah? But it's only on the new leaves, which you'd sort of think, well, logically, if it's got a virus, then it would be on the new leaves. But if it's got a virus and it's on the new leaves, where did it get it from? I've had this one a long time, yeah? Anyway, we shall see. The bulb that it grew, that the spikes come out of, is not as big as previous bulbs. So there was a stress element there. It didn't grow as well. And it put up 2 spikes, one of which failed. So it wasn't strong at that point. Root disturbance, yeah? Left in a pot a bit too long. Change of environment, dramatic change of environment. Maybe it is just stressed. We shall wait and see. And in the meantime, we treat it with extreme caution, make sure it doesn't touch anything else, and make sure everything's sterilised as far as my watering equipment is concerned immediately after watering this one. Oh, look what I've just seen. Didn't see that last time. Round here. I haven't got a clue where the camera is, I'm not concentrating. We have a new growth coming up here. So we do, let's get these old sheaths out of the way, you might be able to see it a bit better. We do have a new growth coming out there. This is my spiky one. So it's coming into growth, yeah, so that's good. See, now I could have said this one isn't in active growth. The spike's dying, it's going over, and we don't have any new growths yet. So why does it need the high feed? Well, there is a new growth, so it's getting it anyway. I wasn't going to knock up a special light feed because it's not growing that much. So anyway, that's the last one. I'll be sorry to lose it if I have to, but you can't take the risk. I can't afford the virus test kits. The only viable way to buy them, quite honestly, is in serious bulk. So, you know, like buying them like 100 at a time from the specialist manufacturer that produces them. Then they work out relatively cheap per test. But I don't think you can buy one anyway. I think the least you can buy is 5 or something. So we won't be doing that. So don't suggest it because it ain't getting done. So there we go. That's a chat about Cymbidiums. They do like bright light. And they can take some sunshine, preferably early morning or late afternoon into the evening. Go steady with that end of the day though, because the heat builds up during the day. And if you add sunshine onto the leaves in the hottest part of the day, late afternoon into the evening, you could be overcooking your plants. The morning sun is the best if you're going to go one end or the other, because it's the cooler part of the day. The sun has an effect via light rather than heat at that time of day, so you don't roast your leaves and evaporate all your moisture and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so media for these, you can get specific terrestrial Cymbidium type mixes, which have got quite a bit of fibrous stuff in them, like a coir probably, because it wouldn't be peat nowadays, we're not supposed to use that, but that type of material. And they can grow quite nicely in that sort of thing, you know, with perhaps half of that and half of bark or something like that. They do grow quite well. But if you have that type of mix, you do have to be a lot more careful in winter when you've got no growth going on, because it could end up being too wet. Yeah. So that's that. Temperature wise, they will take heat, but most of them are classed as cooler growers. They prefer not to have it. Now if they're outside, they'll have to put up with whatever temperature the outside gives them. And in the UK that's not normally a problem. But recently we have had a few problems over the last few years where we've had actual heat waves. And some poor souls in the UK, okay, it's normal in other parts of the world, but heading up towards 40 degrees in the UK is incredibly unusual, and that's not going to do these any good at all. I would suggest, if you're going to get a heat wave where it really gets that type of warmth, try and find somewhere cool for them, just to get them over that period, perhaps in a garage or something. Cool them down a bit, don't subject them to too much heat. And certainly keep them out of the sun. But yeah, their comfort range is from about, you can go below 10 degrees, but I would say 10 degrees up to sort of 23 to 25 is a nice comfortable temperature range for them. And good light and feed well when growing. They are greedy, so feed them well. And then you should get the nice big fat plump bulbs that are strong and healthy, and in many cases, not all, will produce 2 spikes, yeah, rather than just the one, yeah. And mine will be subjected to those conditions this year, whereas they weren't last year, so mine should do better in their next round of flowering. Okay, that's it. That's probably gone on far too long. I was just trying to look at the time. Oh my goodness. Well, some people like the long ones. Well, you've got one. You had a short one yesterday and you didn't get one on Monday. So you got a long one in the middle of the week. Videos will get thin on the ground as we head through the week. I've got to pick Hannah up on Friday. I will get a video done on Friday. If I can, I will try and pre-record the Sunday chat, because when Hannah's down I don't normally do one, but I'll make an effort. We'll see what we can do. I'm out all day Saturday. I will film at the Mathers Foundation glass houses, so we will have some videos of their wonderful orchids, and we'll go from there. So that clears out one of our categories. I hope there was sufficient information in there about Cymbidiums. I can't think of much else to talk about. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.